Hi, Jackie. Welcome back.
Thank you, Adam. Nice to be
Yeah,
back.
and Jackie is pronounced perfectly? Yeah,
Yes,
what I learned, the
indeed.
C is J. So now you are the
Yeah,
Java compatible guest.
all right.
What we learned the last time is that you were indirectly the Tor inventor and directly Log4j inventor or creator. And how it happened was interesting. So, what I understood, there was an IBM research project, and the application itself was, I would say, not that successful. But what happened is everyone became interested in the logging framework inside the application. Is it correct?
That's correct. Yes, and I think the project itself, it was related to what we do, what we call today two-factor authentication, which is a huge thing in itself. So I don't know if I don't know the history of the what happened to the Semper project, this European finance project, but maybe it was also hugely successful. I don't
Okay.
know.
But how people or developers became aware of Log4j, which was inside the project, or maybe it was not even called Log4j back then, right?
No, it was called ZRL Log for Research Zurich Research Lab Log.
Okay.
ZRL, Zurich Research Lab Log. And so I lobbied quite in my department for it to become open sourced. And it took a long time. It took maybe 6 months for it to be open sourced. And it was, so we got the authorization from some higher up place at IBM. And it was published on IBM Developer Works. And at the time it was published there, but the link for the downloads was located at the lab, and I could see the logs. So the first week there were maybe 8 people trying it out, and the second week it was 50, and at one point it became 100 per day, and then maybe several hundred per day, and you could see progress. And what was interesting is that people started contributing. So I got patches.
What was the first patch? You remember?
The first patch was, I think, it was either file appender or rolling file appender. I think that was the first patch.
No, but this is a bigger one. So rolling file append, what it means is that it rotates the files, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't remember the exact patch, but I was like, wow, this is like people doing all the work for me.
Yeah.
This is great.
And how you tested that? Was there because you got the patch, so back then, so how you verified the quality of the code, or what you thought, how to integrate the patch into the project?
So I would say I read the code, I tried to understand it the best I could, and if it made sense, I integrated it. And then, there's a point in time when the project or the code is sufficiently big, you can't test everything. You need to, it needs to be automated. So at around the same time, I read a book on unit Kent Beck's book on unit testing, where he talks about what is it called? Bowling scores, bowling. There's this bowling application that he tests, and it made a lot of sense to me to write unit tests, and that's what I started to do. But the tests were done. It takes a lot of experience to realize that tests are as important for, how should I say this? Tests need to be maintained, and if the test code is not written for maintenance initially, or it takes as much time to maintain the unit test as the real code, and this is what I observed today. I spend a lot more time maintaining the tests than the actual code. But this allows me to, when I need to change something radically, I can actually do it. I can actually do it and be confident that if there's a release, that it will actually work for the users, which is a huge advantage.
How I see unit tests is a little bit different. Is less formal. So before unit tests, before JUnit, what I did, I wrote main methods, because you have to execute your software somehow, and otherwise you don't know whether it is working. And now what I'm doing, I'm misusing unit tests as a executable app, to test my ideas. And then sometimes even I write the entire logic in the unit test and then move it out to production code. And then the unit test just refers to the logic if it's more complicated. So I'm actually, it's maybe an extreme form of test driven, but I have the feeling that for complex logic, I actually saving time with unit tests. But I have no unit tests, integration tests, and system tests. So the system tests in my project, I'm not building, libraries. I'm building more services, apps, something like microservice or monolith. So the unit tests are more for complex logic, and the system tests are calling from outside. So they verify, the API of the system. But unit tests are a great time saver for me. But I can imagine in your case, you need lots of code coverage because you would like to make patching, and contribution easy. So you need to know this is different thinking.
It's not actually, the goal is not to make patches easy, is to avoid hiccups, when you can have... I really don't care about code coverage because there's some code in Logback which is tested maybe 10 different ways, little pieces of code, and some other code which is not tested at all. But the pieces which are tested a lot, they are the critical ones, right? And you need to the critical paths need to be tested for different inputs and like bogus inputs, and also there's this whole idea now, which is kind of new, is to resist to hacking. That is also a consideration, which is kind of new, new to me at least.
Question regarding unit tests. What I did long time, I had a Java class, and the unit test class ended with test. And then what I started to do is I have multiple unit test classes which refer to the one class with different purposes or views. And this is good, but also bad, because you get lots of unit test classes which refer to one class. And it's sometimes hard to find the relation, but I think this approach better, because at the beginning it was no one class, one test, but the class can get huge, and you will have to separate the different aspects in the class. Are you doing something similar with the unit tests?
So let me open a parenthesis of things not to do.
Okay.
Right. So if a few years ago I was very enthusiastic about Scala, so I had tests written in Scala, right? And like whole library, it wasn't that big. And at the same time, we had a configuration system written in Groovy. So in the same project, I had Java, Scala, and Groovy built at the same time. And at one point, when the maintainers of the Scala compiler in Maven the Scala plugin didn't work, and basically what I'm trying to say, it was really a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
So I had to migrate all the Scala tests to Java, and the Scala test there was a hierarchy, quite a shallow hierarchy of tests, like one main class, one parent class and a few child classes, but or the derived classes. But usually the class hierarchy for my unit tests are quite shallow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now, what also interests me, what you mentioned last time is that, the filtering in Log4j was the hierarchical thing was caught lots of attention. Why? I mean, because it's an internal detail. It seems like it solved a problem, and it was like almost an invention, something new, right? So why back then everyone was that excited about hierarchical filtering in Log4j?
Because this allows you to filter very simply large chunks of logs, right? You can say, I'm not interested in whatever is spewed out or generated by such and such classes. So you can say, I'm not interested in what is generated by Spring, and you deactivate org.spring. And it's like very easy thing to do, and you disable whole. You can disable logs by locality, right?
So I mean, the killer feature is then the mapping between Java packages and filtering, right? If you have if your code is nicely structured, you have the direct relation. You can use your structure from a code, to configure almost conventional over configuration the Log4j setting.
Yes.
Another thing, forgot to ask this. So this was these ZRL Zurich Research Logging Labs.
Yes.
Yeah. When do you rename that to Log4j? So how it happened?
So this is funny because someone at IBM didn't like ZRL log. They wanted to. They basically said, okay, this should be named Log4j. At some point, because at the time IBM used to suffix their packages or their software by 4j, and that's what that's the reason.
Because back then everything had to be 4j, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so it was open source earlier and renamed, or was it the same time, open sourcing and renaming?
I think it was at the same time. Yeah.
Back to filtering, because I also spent time back then with exception handlings, logging, and structure. And how my projects always look like. So there were different names for it, but mostly we call that business components. And I think I started with this around 2000 or something like this. So it was like the Java packages on top level in a business project, or now even the libraries. They always have meaningful names from the project perspective, so domain-related names, right? So if I open Log4j, I would expect to find filters, appenders, or whatever, but not, data access objects or whatever. And this was the same in my projects, but we had not, appenders, filters, or whatever. We had rather than, accounts, shopping carts, and orders. So in all the packages had substructure. It varied, but the recent 10 years, I use boundary control entity. Before then, we had like facade, I think behavior, domain. There were different flavors. But the cool story is, if we have the packages, I could do something like this, like I'm only interested in business transactions logging, and I would just see, the filter just to the domain object.boundary, and I could just see what this logger is emitting. I could map directly the structure of my application, and this was meaningful because if I know that the package has domain meaning and the boundary accepts calls from outside for business project, means I'm actually monitoring business transactions then if I activate this. So this was interesting. So this was the first thing. The second thing we said from the beginning, log levels are a mess, unusable in projects because of the nature of business project. You have to imagine there were 20 different companies contributing to the same project, and every developer had a different idea, what a log level is. So, okay, all log levels are forbidden. What we do is we think, what to use at all. And we have something like system exceptions, which happens, if the system, let's say, out of memory or something, out of memory is too much, but let's say we have a problem with threads, the pool is empty. These are system exceptions. So, system exceptions are always mapped to Log4j logging, let's say, critical or severe. Mm-hmm. And the business exceptions are actually, they can happen, and they are part of the use cases, so we map them to warning. And so what we did is we had exact mapping, between exceptions and the log levels. And what we also had in the project, we say, and everything else is info, whatever, but debug and so forth is for very specific cases. And this worked better because before then, the developers use whatever is necessary to see the log outputs in the log files. So this is how I use the log levels and the filters in my projects in the past. So just to report back, what's your...
So you're saying exceptions were logged at level error level, and the rest was logged at the debug level. That's what you're saying. Or?
What I said is we had two kinds of exceptions. One, right. This was in most enterprise business-like projects. One exception was like system exception. It was technical, like for instance, there are no enough JDBC connections, let's say, to a database.
Right.
And the other exception was business exception, like you cannot order because your input is invalid. So like bad request.
Okay. Right.
So we mapped the system exception to the highest possible level, severe or critical, as I remember, and the business exception to warning. Then we said, right. These two are taken. So you can, of course, directly write the critical level, because how is it actually called? Severe, right? The highest is severe in Log4j.
No, it's so there is error, and then above error is what is it called?
We have to ask the committer of Log4j what it is.
Is it critical?
I think.
Yeah, it's. I don't.
Yeah.
Since it. So this critical level was eliminated in SLF4j, right? Because the idea of critical, or whatever its equivalent in Log4j was that you should stop the application. Mm-hmm. That was the logic, and then it seemed unreasonable to have the Log4j does not have the authority to stop the application, exactly. Right?
But what we did with the critical or the highest was we used a specific appender. And then I remember we reported to Tivoli, for instance, IBM, so we created tickets automatically. So if something, the highest exception happened, and if you would use that, a ticket were automatically created. So what we should actually test it. And the business exceptions were warning, and the logging was business logging. So we say, if you log something, you have to have meaningful logs, which is really hard. And my personal opinion is logging is as hard as writing good Java doc. So there is, you have to spend some time to think what you are doing.
Absolutely.
And even sometimes I say, if you really would like to write good logs, actually, we have to write unit tests to see whether we'll find the logs, in the output. Because if we log a lot and we cannot find it in production, this is completely pointless. So
yes.
We use the info, I think, for more or less, how to call it, even audits. So what the application is doing, like I'm here and here, but what was, and I always hated, I never understood, for instance, like writing, an interceptor, and the interceptor would write everything because I say, okay, this is mine. I don't like to see everything. I was here and I was here and I was here. This is a stack trace basically. So we can create stack trace every second, and it will see the entire stack trace in the log files. What I would like to see is, the severe errors, then the business errors, because it's anomaly if we get lots of input errors, and then everything else is just, info. And then we talk about the remaining log levels. But suddenly what happened is, all the log levels, Log4j levels, got their meaning. They were meaningful. So no one just randomly, wrote statements to, let's say, debug or whatever, just to see the output. And if they wanted to, the expectation was, if we go to production, we will switch from debug back to whatever. So this was the idea. So we tried not to misuse Log4j for profiling. It's almost like a formal way to make it more, I would say, operational. So to increase the quality of operations, maybe.
So, what I synthesize from what you're saying, there logging can be used for two different, related but different purposes. Mm-hmm. One is for the programmer's benefit, mm-hmm. and the other one is for more a business person's benefit, exactly. or support, people who are doing support. And they need to have data, for example, if it's you are trying to understand why a person cannot log on a client. I mean, for example, if they're trying to, if it's a secure application where they received some QR code and they're trying to connect to a banking application, so there are many different steps. Mm-hmm. And you need to correlate all these steps together, and steps which might even occur at different times. So maybe there's a first step occurring in the beginning of the month, mm-hmm. and then a second step occurring maybe a week later. Mm-hmm. You sent a letter in the beginning of the month, the letter is received, and the client is trying to connect. So there's this problem of long-term process. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to debug as a support person that process, and that should have, like you were saying, an audit, mm-hmm. Meaning in audits or in support, and that's a different use case. And I think Log4j was not very good at that. Mm-hmm. So there is. In Logback, I mean, it has been many years now that I'm trying to add functionality for audit logs, or I don't know if that's the right term, business logs. And so in SLF4j now you have key value pairs that you can add into your logs. You can also, there's the MDC, map that, mm-hmm. yeah.
But Jackie, this was not that. It was not a business, and actually all my projects were business projects. I spent only a little time, in building libraries. And if in a business project, if you think about this, everything is some kind of business, because the operations, will see the logs. This support is always there, or sometimes even call centers, and tickets have to be escalated. And what we just did is we tried to add additional meaning to the log levels. So we knew if we see info, it has this meaning, and if we see warning, is this meaning, and critical also via this meaning. So at the beginning of the project, we had a mapping between the exceptions and log levels and what is actually inside. And before this, it was like randomness. Every developer just used whatever log level, and there was no unique strategy. So we couldn't effectively use the filters because if we decided to log this level, sometimes there were important messages and sometimes not that important. So we always had a convention, and this was one of the convention which worked well.
Mm-hmm. So doing some mapping between business use case and levels, it's fine, but the number of levels that you have at your disposal is quite limited. So there's another way of having this cross-cutting, adding cross-cutting meaning is using markers. Mm-hmm. So in Logback until recently, you could have one marker, mm-hmm. and a marker is just a tag, mm-hmm. right? A tag, you can say, this is database related, and you add the DB tag to whatever logs that you want. And in recent versions, you can have multiple tags.
Very good.
So you can have the same log tags, as many tags as you want, plus a level, of mm-hmm. course. And this allows you to filter using as many concerns as you want.
This could be also a solution, but we use, instead of tagging, we use the package structure, right? So using the package structure, we exactly knew where it comes from, and we had business components and systems, we call that. So for instance, the database was different beast, because I spent my time in Java and microprofile, and the database was JPA entity manager. It was completely covered, by the entity manager, and we were outside of that usually. But it's interesting. So the tag sounds really interesting. But now Log4j 1. So what interests me now, you did the Log4j 1, and then I was aware that there is a Log4j book where you can buy it. I bought it. It was a nice book, and I was impressed that someone called Jackie creates a business, with selling books. And I think your official strategy back then was you are supporting, the open source project by selling the books, right? This is, at least I read an interview, I remember this right now, on java.net, I think, with you. And I said, this is actually really interesting. So this is like a Java startup, right? So how you got the idea and how it happened? So you quit IBM and then started, to work Log4j full time, or?
So I decided to return to the French-speaking part. Decided to leave Zurich and decided to return to Lausanne. And I got job interviews. So I started doing consulting at a software company. And logging was basically kind of a side job. And, when you're 20 or under 30, let's say, you have a lot of energy. So you can do multiple things in the same day, and it sounds okay. I mean, it sounds feasible. So that's what I did. And I had a gap between two gigs, and I decided to write a book. And I thought, let's give this a try and see if it's if it makes if it's what is it called?
Feasible. Makes sense.
Feasible and economically interesting. And if you look at how, if you publish a book using a regular editor, so the Log4j book was self-published, right?
One of the first self-published book, I think. Back then, it was very rare that someone self-published a book, right?
You could do it, but people wouldn't buy your book. So a book that is self-published and is sold, that's rare, yes. And of course, the project was doing the publicity for the book. So if you are interested in learning more about Log4j, buy the book. So there's a selling argument there, and the reason for doing that was as an author you get maybe 5 or 10% of the sales price of a book.
Almost nothing. Yeah, I was also author. This is true here.
And then you do the math. A really good selling computer book sells around 10,000
copies.
Copies. Times $4, so you're maxed at $40,000, let's say. And the question is it worth doing 6 months, at least 6 months of work for $40,000? And my idea was no, it wasn't worth it. So I decided to self-publish. But when you self-publish, you also have to do the shipping of the books, and that takes a lot of time, like the packaging. I used to go to our local post office with heaps of books and wait at the in front of the teller. And it's an ongoing joke in our family. When we would go on vacation, I would take a bunch of a whole set of books, and I would go to the local post office in the mountains, in the mountains, and send books, and people remember it, and they make fun of this.
But it's a great story, great memories, right? I mean, this is
But of course, it's also a kind of a burden, right? Because you have to. If somebody orders a book and you have to react rather quickly, and it's very time consuming. And so I lived. I must say, it was okay for a few years, or 2 or 3 years. It was kind of okay, and then the sales started to drop off. Then I published a PDF. Oh, and of course, the initial version of the book was a PDF, and I didn't have the idea to protect the book, so it was available, and it is still available on some Chinese or Russian or whatever sites, and you can download it for free. And that's a really big problem, right? Because if somebody can download the book for free, it's much easier than doing that instead of going through the hassle of ordering and so on. So that was
except someone likes the project, right? Then they should buy it. I mean, this is like
yes, but the proportion of that that's a really interesting question, right? So there's a lot of people with goodwill, but when there are practical questions, somehow practicality wins.
Yeah. Okay, so you use how many print copies you sold back then? You know it? Roughly. I'm just curious. You reached the 10,000 mark?
I think it was just a little under 10,000. I think it was maybe 6,000 or 7,000.
So you went with 6,000 books to the post office?
Yeah, not in a single day, but over a period of few years. And of course, there were libraries, they call them libraries, right? In bookstores, which would order maybe 40, 50 books at a time.
Okay. So I did similar things. So I also self-published book, but it was directly available. But some bookstores wanted to have the books from me for unknown reason. So I also sent over the books back then, which was interesting. But you can do the math. If you send 10 books a time, there's 6,000 books. So you walk 600 times to the post office, right? If it takes like half an hour, so you spend 300 hours at post office. So you were well known.
It was a very big post office.
Oh, okay, character.
The Lausanne post office is the biggest in Switzerland.
Oh, okay, then it's not a problem. If a smaller one would be more interesting, you would you would yes, go there golden something, a golden medal, as a post client. This is actually interesting story. But I bought a PDF from you. This is possible, right? I don't. Yes. This is what I have. This is what I know. Okay. We are talking about Log4j 1. So, what were the features you created between ZRL? I mean, the high-level features, whether the killer use case or killer features you created in Log4j, which were not available at the ZRL time and were available, at the end of Log4j 1.
I think the Log4j 1 was better structured. So you had this concept of appenders, and appenders you could attach them to loggers. A CRL log, I think it only could have you could attach them to the root logger. I mean, the structure was less flexible and less ordered. I would say less. It would make it was kind of clumsy. The Log4j one at Apache had a better structure, and that's the big difference, I would say. And it was more pluggable and so on. It has been so many years ago, and I've written logging frameworks maybe 4 or 5 times now, so I don't really remember, the exact evolution.
But what I remember, Log4j 2 came out, and it used the LMAX disruptor pattern. So I was really curious. It's like, this is interesting. So what LMAX disruptor is like ring buffer. And what you did, you can just write the log events to the ring buffer as a byte array, and they will somehow cache them very fast, so the application can move on. And asynchronously from the other end, the events were read and stored on disk. So this was really, I would say, back then, cutting edge. This was like, if I saw this, this is really great, application or idea to use the LMAX disruptor here. And then LMAX is for London Stock Exchange or something, LM, and it was what's called the name of the author of LMAX? You remember? It's Mr. Thompson or something. But the question is, how you got the idea to integrate LMAX disruptor with Log4j2?
Oh, this is not me. This is Ralph Gore's.
Okay.
Log4j2. I'm not related at all to Log4j2.
Okay. I didn't know that. So they fork Log4j1 and call it Log4j2, or Log4j2 is completely different?
Log4j2 is completely different, and it's interesting because Ralph Gore's, so before Log4j2, there was, around 2005, Jakarta Commons Logging was extremely popular. I don't know if you remember. But Jakarta Commons Logging, under certain circumstances, would class loading circumstances, and if there was an exception and you tried to log, the logging itself would throw an exception and you would lose the original exception. So it was really quite a tricky situation. And so I spent some time trying to understand why this happened. And the reason was this dynamic loading binding system that Jakarta Commons Logging had at the time. And I said, okay, so we need to do something much more simple, much simpler, and much more robust. And this is SLF4j, right? So
we can say SLF4j is like Jakarta Commons Logging refactored.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. But the idea out there was to have a much simpler binding system, which would either work or break. But if it worked, you would know that it would work during the lifetime of the application, which is a nice property to have, right? Because if it breaks early, you can know about it. But if it breaks during critical times, during the lifetime of the application, you actually lose valuable information.
One question. Were you somehow involved in Jakarta Commons Logging, or was it complete, different?
No, So Jakarta Commons Logging was basically an attempt to integrate, to create a buffer between, not a buffer, but to be compatible with both Log4j1 and Java util logging.
This was like a log facade, right? So this was like...
Yes, exactly. But this Jakarta Commons Logging had this terrible, this very inconvenient feature. It's convenient. It looks convenient. This dynamic logging, loading of the logging framework or logging backend, but under real-time situations in a container, JBoss or Tomcat, it would fail quite terribly. So there had to be an answer, a more reliable answer to that. And so I created SLF4j, and at the time that there was resistance to adopt SLF4j inside Log4j1, right? So I said, okay, this situation cannot go on, and I decided at the time to create Logback as a native implementation of SLF4j.
Okay.
And so this was in 2005, and 2008 through 2010-11, 2008. So for 2 years and a half, I collaborated with Ralph Gore's. And at one point, he suggested that there should be some lookup mechanism inside the message. So when you were logging a message, the system should be able to look into the message and see if there was more interpretation to be done. And I resisted to this idea, and he said, "Okay, I want to implement this." And he went and implemented Log4j2.
Okay.
So Log4j2 is kind of the successor of Logback, if you want.
Okay.
Right.
But right now, I could just use Logback directly without SL4j, right? Because you have not.
You can, of course.
But this makes sense, because if I'm why to use the facade if I commit, to a simple framework, that would be actually a natural choice to use just Logback directly, right?
No, because the idea. So if you use the SLF4j, you don't lose anything by using compared to Logback.
Yeah.
It's very.
But I have one more dependency in my Maven POM, right? So this is what I'm thinking about right now.
But SLF4j is used by, you will have SLF4j as a dependency, because at least one library will have it. If you use, like, you have 20 dependencies, at least one of them will have SLF4j.
Yeah, my world is a bit different. So for instance, for a few years right now, I'm running with Quarkus, and what I'm exclusively using is just, the microprofile dependencies, the small I microprofile dependencies. And the Log4j or whatever they are using is hidden by Quarkus. So I don't see this. So usually, this was the same story with Payara. Payara used Log4j, but I never saw this. So I don't care. And with Quarkus, it's the same. And if we are running mostly in the clouds right now, so I'm running in serverless mode. And if you're running on Lambda, let's say, then lots of the assumptions we have in Java are no more true, because there is no concurrent access to the logs, because one Lambda can be only executed by one process. So actually, we have two types of such serverless applications. One is asynchronous Lambda, which listens to Kafka or whatever. And this is so simple that we don't have any dependencies. So sometimes I even use system out printline, because the logs are aggregated by the cloud. I just write format which is recognizable, and all the filtering and separation happens later in CloudWatch. So this is one strategy. And sometimes I use system log. It works. What I don't like about Java user logging, system logging, is they write always two lines, right? So we have to create a format that writes one line. This is a little bit annoying that they always output 2 lines, but then it would be perfect. So, and now if I would like to have more, now in my situation, I say, okay, the SL4j, this abstraction is no more necessary, because in my services, I could just, use Logback directly if I'm missing something in system out println, because there's no added value to abstract from the logging framework, because my logging is greatly simplified, right?
Well, I don't agree, because the cost of using SLF4j instead of Logback is very, the SLF4j API is I don't know, it's maybe, I have it in front of
It's
me.
not about the size. It's about the amount of dependencies I have to look at, right? So maintain. This is only size. I don't care. This is, even if it were 1 meg, it is fast enough. I believe it. So, size is really this not the problem. The problem I would see is, if Logback is enough, I would just pick Logback, and if I don't need the facade, or I will just, because what you said is, this was interesting. Simple SL4j is facade, and Logback is the native implementation, the first one. For the others, SL4j acts as a bridge or adapter. So therefore, I say, if I know I'm happy with Logback, I would just use Logback, right? So this is like I don't know whether you're aware of JPA on Hibernate. In some projects, they just use Hibernate and skip JPA. They say, okay, we know that we will spend the entire time with Hibernate. So I'm a little bit against that. It's like, what happens if? But there are different landscape. The project sometimes gets smaller. So I would say, okay, then this is why I'm asking you. But I have no problem using SL4j. But I didn't knew actually the Logback is the native implementation in the SL4j. I thought, Logback is an additional possibility to be used as a logging solution.
So there are other native implementations. There's an native implementations. I mean, there's an implementation called Log Event. There's another recent implementation called Pena, which is a direct native implementation. So
I see the use case. What we can do, we have a Lambda which will run locally, so we can start it on my machine to test it. So it could use different implementation than in the cloud with specific formatting, for instance. So what I will see, Then I can use SL4j and then swap the implementations depending in which context. This is what I see. But if I just, I know I am in one context, then I would say, okay, I would prefer Logback or whatever from the source, from Jackie, and say, okay, the abstraction not necessary. Because from the architectural perspective, if I see SL4j, which is a facade, it already implies someone is interested in swapping the logging frameworks. If I would say no Logback, only see Logback without the facade, it implies to me, okay, we tested Logback and we are happy with it and we go for it. There is no use case of swapping the logging frameworks. But
okay, so swapping logging frameworks is clearly one use case. There's another one. There's another advantage of using SLF4j is that you will be only using the API which is related to logging, which is kind of how can I say, which is kind of related to what you are trying to do as a developer, right? If you're using the Logback implementation or API, you can do in the middle of your code somewhere completely unrelated. You can start configuring Logback, okay? Whereas that's something you cannot do with SLF4j. You cannot configure Logback using SLF4j. So it creates, if you use SLF4j in your code and at some single point you do configuration of Logback using an XML file, for example, or some other mechanism, there's this separation of concerns. So there's logging throughout your code, and at a single point there's configuration.
Okay, this makes sense. So this changes everything. So what you are saying is that SL4j is an API, and this is narrow or very constrained API, and Logback it is a very powerful and broader API. And if we are running for business apps in my case, so we could have like convention, we just use SL4j, which is just a minimal logging API. And then we are not, this is actually a huge use case, because if SL4j is nice and small and beautiful, we can say even code reviews, if we find, entry in import Logback, and say, okay, what they're doing here, SL4j should be efficient, should be enough, to write logs. So this is what I perfectly see. So it means with SL4j, you created the canonical way how logs has to be written in Java. And this is the simplest possible, simplest possible logging API, right? This is an API, and the Logback is the SPI. And what SL4j also comes with is this like adapter layer, which implements the API and passes the invocations to incompatible implementations, right?
That's true. That's exactly true.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
So if I would say I love, SL4j, the simplest possible SL4j implementation would be Logback, right?
No, there is SLF4j simple.
Okay, this would be the simplest one.
And somebody observed recently that this SLF4j simple was a stupid name, because SLF4j is simple logging facade for Java -simple. It was a horrible name. But yeah, it's now too late to change. So Maven uses, I believe, or used to implement, or they had an implementation very similar to, or directly based on SLF4j simple.
So Jakarta Commons happened to abstract to have a facade between Java util logging and Log4j1. You had problems with dynamic binding, and you created SL4j, which is a simplified version. And then you say, okay, if we have it, you can have an implementation. This was Logback from you. And is Logback related to Java to Log4j1?
So I think Logback is very similar to Log4j1.
You copied, you reused the code, or was it clean room?
No, I've rewritten almost everything.
How long it took? Was it faster than Log4j1?
It took me, I think, maybe 3 weeks or maybe a month to have the first version of Logback.
This is not bad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the one big difference, I think, was the amount of tests. I wrote a lot more tests with Logback. Mm-hmm. So the Logback comes with over 1,000 unit tests. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's 1,000 or 2,000. I mean, it's a lot more than Log4j. And Logback tests are finer. They have, they're more different, very data input. It's tested with a lot more data input, so that it works in a lot more circumstances, and the test coverage is much larger. Logback.
So we covered until Logback. This what happened. Is something else you are working right now on logging, or you are done with logging?
I don't know if you have heard the German Ministry of Economy. They have this fund for open source projects, and it's called the Sovereign Technology Fund, I believe, or Tech Fund. And we have recently signed a contract, a multi-year, 2-year contract. They're investing in SLF4j Logback and Reload4j. Reload4j is the security fixed version of Log4j1, because Log4j1 was abandoned at Apache, and still many people are using Log4j1. So we needed that there had to be some security plugged version of Log4j1, and I'm working on Reload4j as well. So there are 3 projects, and this is all financed by the Sovereign Tech Fund.
Okay. And this reload, it will be like Log4j 1x, right? This is like a refactored version of Log4j1.
It's not refactored. The only difference is that since Log4j is a trademark name and Apache as well, so no, actually that's not even true. It's the name Reload4j is different than Log4j, okay, but the code is exactly the same. So you still use org Apache Log4j in Reload4j. So it's the same package name as well. So this is one of the properties of you can fork. You can fork a project as is, and that's what I have done with Reload4j. So you just remove Log4j1 from your dependencies, you replace it with Reload4j, and it's exactly the same.
Okay.
It's not even refactored. It's the same. It's the same code.
And you did it because it disappeared from Apache, the Log4j1?
No, because the project management committee of Log4j, they decided not to maintain Log4j1 anymore. Okay. So even security bugs were not, security vulnerabilities were not fixed. Whereas Reload4j fixes security vulnerabilities in Log4j.
Yeah, and the problem is if they decided, that the project is on hold, is basically dead for Apache. This is the problem, right? So you cannot contribute to Log4j1.
Exactly. So that's what we tried. We tried to resuscitate Log4j1. A couple of maintainers, and the project management committee said no. Log4j1 is EOL, end of life since 2015, and the decision was reaffirmed January 2006 of January 2022, and that was it. So we had to take it outside.
But this is, I don't like to judge it, but this is an not optimal situation or decision, right? This is what I mean, because if this is that important, the library, and is it still used? I mean, some patches could be, right? I mean,
I think the thing is this of course makes sense. This is what everybody does. If you have an old version of your library, you can always say, and of course Log4j1 and Log4j2 are very different. I mean, it's much easier to say, oh, you have a problem in Log4j1, please migrate to Log4j2.
Okay. So Log4j2 was created by a different contributor. Was lots of Log4j code reused, or also clean room implementation?
I don't know.
Okay, interesting. You don't know it, because it would be interesting. Okay.
But I can say when I read Log4j2, I don't understand it. So,
okay.
So it's quite different.
So now, of course, there was the security issue with Log4j, but I assume this was a Log4j2, right?
Yes.
So how many people ping you and ask, I think there was lots of confusion for you, right? So if you get a lot of security problems and they meant, it's something, you have something to do, but you have absolutely nothing to do with it, right?
Absolutely nothing. and I would say, and so the Log4Shell CVE, the real, how can I say, the vulnerability is so severe because you can actually inject a message, a text message, and if it contains a certain certain incantation, it gets interpreted, and you get a GNDI call, and so on. And this is the reason why Log4j2 was created. So as I mentioned earlier, so in 2010, Ralph Gores and some other people, he wasn't alone, some other people suggested that we should do message interpolation. And I resisted to that idea because I didn't see the use case, and it seemed too much. And imagine if Log4Shell vulnerability was in SLF4j, right? Because if you look at the distribution of logging frameworks, so there is Log4j1, which is used by 30% of or 35% of projects. There's Logback, which is used in 50% of projects worldwide, and Log4j2 is maybe 10%, right? So if the vulnerability was introduced in SLF4j, the impact would have been 10 times worse than what we know with Log4j2. It would have been much, much worse. So it was I could have said, why not have more functionality? So it makes sense. There were people who are volunteering to maintain it. I could have taken the easy road, and I kind of resisted by luck. I could have gone. It could have gone the other way. It could have been, it makes sense. Let's incorporate this functionality, and history would have been different.
The interesting part is, your goal was to be completely static and simpler. So this is why you created SL4j in both ways, right? The first way was don't rely on the content of the message, and the second one, you wanted to remove the dynamic lookups or bindings in Jakarta Commons Logging. So you were just create simple stuff. This is why maybe the Log4Shell issue was not as severe, because the Log4j1 is very old. Log4j2, is only affected. Log4j2 is affected, and the older libraries were using Log4j1, which is really old, which means unpatched software were likely used the older library Log4j, or the newer, which is more popular, the SL4j, and this is like a situation which is not that clear maybe to the outside world, the relation between Log4j1 and Log4j2. This is unfortunate that they're actually complete different frameworks, which reminds me Angular 1 and Angular 2 is the same situation, right? They have nothing to do with each other. And this was actually an interesting part. And now with the reload, you do actually the work. You are making the Log4j framework usable again under different name, and they got like more hardened version of Log4j1, right?
So yes, that's correct. And I should add that the severity of the vulnerability in Log4j1 and Log4j2 on paper, from a 10,000 feet point of view, they're quite similar, but in practice they're completely different. The severity. So I think there's this notation by the people who maintain CVEs. The vulnerability in Log4j1 has the notation 8 or something out of 10, and the Log4j2 one has a severity of 10 over 10. But in reality, to gain access through the Log4j1 vulnerability, you need to have access to the configuration file.
What is now the vulnerability in Log4j1? Maybe you can briefly.
So you can. There are several ones. So the most severe one, severe between quotes, is if you write. You can write inside the Log4j1 configuration configuration file. You can directly write the GNDI name of an attacker, of a corrupt site, and you have to relaunch your application after having modified the properties file, and it would connect. Your application would connect to that corrupt site, and the corrupt site would gain access to your execution access to to your file. Whereas the Log4j 2.1 is somebody writes a config message with a GNDI incantation, and if that message is logged, and usually it is, they gain access to your to your machine, which is completely different, right? For example, imagine the case of Minecraft. So this game, they use Log4j2, and they logged messages, chat messages between users. So you have a normal user of your game. They write a message calling a GNDI incantation. This gets logged on by the Minecraft server, and they gain access to your machine. Whereas if they had used Log4j1, somebody within Minecraft would have to manipulate the properties file inside the Minecraft server, which is completely different use case.
I mean, this is, maybe it is vulnerability, but I'm saying in all my project is pointless because, as I said, we are packaging, the enterprise apps, and for me, we have no difference between the configuration and Java code. So we are testing everything is committed at once. And it will be the same as saying, Java is vulnerable because you could, write Java class with HTTP 11 client downloads from something. And I mean, this is stupid. Yeah, of course, I can misconfigure, if I misconfigure the database, it can connect, with command and, command and, forget what the name is, command and actions or whatever server. And, instead of communicating with my database, I will communicate with different database. So for me, it is obvious that if you have access to the machine and to the configuration, you can do, dangerous things. But I think for all my projects, this is not even would be considered as security problem that you can misconfigure Log4j1 to connect to a server which doesn't belong to you. This is this is pointless, I would say. But
so let me. I can tell you an anecdote. Yeah. It's a real one that happened to me. So when this during December of 2021. Logback also uses a JMS appender, and it's exactly the same case as Log4j1, right? You have to have access to the configuration file. So somebody, a Chinese person, or somebody claiming to be Chinese, they sent a proof of concept CV to me, and they said, okay, imagine somebody had access to the configuration file. This is what they could do. And I said, this could be quite bad as long as they have access to the configuration file. And they said, okay, but there are other bugs which allow access to the configuration file or to any arbitrary file, but not to binary files. And this is okay, so this, in some certain cases, you can do escalation of vulnerabilities. You have one vulnerability which gives you access to another vulnerability, and then it leads to a code execution, remote code execution. I said, okay, this is something that need to be considered. So I filed a report with the Swiss vulnerability response team in Bern, the capital of Switzerland. And they wrote back to me and they said, no, this is not a problem. Yeah. And I said, but it could be a problem. Please give me a number. So they assign you a number, right? It's an international number. And they said, no, we've talked about this within our experts, and we decided that it was not a vulnerability. And I said, no, please give me. I need the number to officialize this. Give me the number. And this ping pong took a few days, and at the end they said, okay, we don't think it's a vulnerability. But as the software author, you have the last word. It's your decision. Do you really want a number? I said, yes, please give me a number. And they gave it to me, of course. And
what would be interesting is, what would we change if the Log4j would not be configured in XML, but you could use a Java DSL to configure it? Because then the configuration becomes a part of the application. And the question is it still now, security problem or no more? But at the end, you have configuration layer, and whether you use XML parsing, JSON parsing, YAML parsing, or Java DSL, it should be the same outcome. So this is what what really interesting conversation, because in my project again we package everything statically. We never change something in production. This is not allowed. If we have a new commit causes new release, and the XML, also there is no way to change the XML. And I only saw once in a project what I tried to do, but it never worked. This was funny. So what I tried to do with Log4j1, they had a thread in a war, which just pulled the configuration of the Log4j, and if something changed, they could reload the entire Log4j. So this is what I did. I saw this in code review. But the interesting part is the XML in Java was inside a war. And I say, okay, how you can do this? Because you cannot from outside, change the war and replace the file. But there was no answer because the project was already in production and the architect was gone. So this was the only instance I saw. And now anecdote to you. This is somehow related. So one project used a lot. Jelly XML Apache. Yeah. This was like XML programming language. It was Maven 1 was based on Jelly, and in one project they have incredible amount of XML configuration. In Java was famous, 15 years ago, that everything can be configurable, dynamic factories and class for name, new instance, and so forth. And I say, this is just stupid. Why you have writing, everything is static and everything can be configurable in XML in your project? It's like strange. And they told me, yes, because from the quality perspective, quality assurance perspective, if they change the configuration, they don't have to retest the application. So, what they did is they wrote more and more configuration code, to omit the, costly quality assurance process. But then I told them, if you are this is your strategy, remove Java entirely and write just Jelly, so you never will have to test your application. This was also anecdote. And they thought about this, and this was a half joke, how truth. But this is what can happen. But I would say Log4j1, interesting that we talk about security. For me, it is not a security problem at all. And Log4j2, or at all, from my understanding, what they told me right now, it wouldn't affect my projects. What could happen if you have a cloud-like provider with a single XML configuration and lots of applications, and the administrator has access to the Log4j1 configuration, but this would be terrible architecture. I would say this cannot be. But and Log4j2 is of course severe because the messages are interpreted and all interpreters are problematic always. Interpretation of PDF, even MP4 or whatever is always a problem with security. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to belabor on this point because I mostly agree with you, but in my position I cannot discount security claims, right? So I have to take it seriously, even if the probability is very small. If the probability exists, I cannot ignore it.
It is just my egoistic, enterprise backend point of view. And if I would be cloud provider, different story. It's just, everyone has a specific use. And just is interesting. And I asked the question already, but do you get lots of emails, because people suspect that you have something to do with the Log4j 2 bug or no? Or they know that you're not...
No, I didn't get...
okay, interesting.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It was... very interesting. We covered now the entire history of logging in Java almost, right?
Yes, we have. Yeah. And the history continues. And so I don't know if we will get the chance to talk again, but I'd like to maybe add a word.
I would like to talk with you again. So if you say this history continues, we schedule a meeting and we'll talk about the continuity.
We can do that. So let me just say something about this. What happened subsequent to the Log4Shell attack?
Mm-hmm.
Something changed in the sense that people started contributing or making donations to open source projects, namely my projects, the QS.ch projects. So Google sponsored security reviews. Several, not that many actually, but larger companies, they sponsor our projects on GitHub. And I mentioned the Sovereign Tech Fund. And this makes quite a big difference. I mean, if you can actually live via investments in open source projects, and it doesn't take that much money because we have like millions of users, right? And if even a very small proportion of users said, okay, let's make some donation or make some, it would make a huge difference. And I hope that the Sovereign Tech Fund will kind of open the way for other projects to be sponsored by or invested by corporations, because so much of our infrastructure is based on open source software, and this software is not being helped by anyone, right? Monetary wise.
My personal opinion about that is, for years actually, is the following. To use open source is not free. So you have two choices. You have no dependencies and you create everything in-house from scratch, but you will have to maintain the code. If you use an open source library from outside, the cost is at least to keep it up to date. So you have to think about every open source dependency, and you will have to increase the version and always work against the recent version, and you need someone to care about that. Or if this is an important dependency, then from my point of view, you have to decide either someone in-house cares about the dependencies and has the overview when to patch what and which implication it has, or you hire external company which does it for you and you pay them to maintain the open source library. The biggest thing which I did in this direction was back then Glassfish. It was an open source, I don't know whether you're aware, you heard about this, it was an open source Java application server from Sun Microsystems. And at the same time, it was the reference implementation, but you could buy support from Sun. And I said, okay, this is a critical part of your infrastructure. If you use the open source version, before I patch it for you, I am not the committer from Glassfish. I would hire Sun Microsystems. And you should have contract with them because they are the committers. If you find a bug, you can report the bug and they will patch it for you. And the cool story is, if you, let's say I'm using Logback and I find an problem in the code in my local fork of Logback, or I said it already, I'm creating a fork which has to be maintained by the company. But if I hire a company, what I understood, QoS.ch, you would, for instance, provide me, with Logback support or whatever, if I ask, I guess. So if I ask you, I get two things. First, you understand me immediately because you are the committer. And we don't have a fork. So it means, my idea, my contribution lands in a central location. And this central location is maintained for everyone. So this is what has to be understood, so that I would say open source in no cases for serious software is free. And by paying open source contributors, you can actually save money and time. So this is my point of view.
Yes, I absolutely. But in practice, it doesn't happen. I've had cases at large enterprises, which I shall not name, but for example, regarding Log4j 1 and Reload4j, they were like begging for support. Literally, they were like explaining how much it would cost them to, if the Reload4j wasn't there and so on. I said, okay, so you can buy support. And I started helping them. And at one point, when they were reassured that Reload4j would actually help their use case, their problems, migrating from Log4j 1 to Reload4j is trivial. You just have to change the group ID in Maven, and you're done. So, and when it came time to pay, they didn't.
Oh,
and it's like a very large company, and so this is what in practice this is what happens. Corporations who pay, they find an excuse not to pay. This is not always the case, but it happens a lot. And I think, I hope that the mentalities will change.
And you have to, demand more money. So you say, okay, now send me in advance, this, and then we talk about, because it's critical infrastructure, so you have to be more aggressive. Don't be too nice, to the companies. This is maybe also a problem. As open source contributors, we should sell better our services.
That is precisely, I think that's precisely true. But at the same time, if the software is quite, the documentation is good and the not too hard to understand and not too hard to use, you don't actually need the support, right?
Yeah. Hey, it was perfect.
So anyway,
I would like to invite you back and talk about the future, whatever you're doing. It was a nice conversation and more open source software now in total. So it was really an interesting discussion, and I learned. I didn't knew that Logback natively implements SL4j. So this was actually a nice finding, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Adam. Nice. Have a nice. It was a very nice conversation. Thank you.